Fear the Greeks by Ben Hinshaw. Athens at 6 in the August evening is loud and shrouded by fumes. Guidebook in hand, cursing himself for not planning ahead, Tom at last finds them a room near ammonium, its mattress sweat-stained and rife with bugs. To divert her attention away from the squalor, he asks Becca if she is hungry. With her back to him, she stands at the window in jeans and a yellow vest, tan, telling the story of her jobless summer. Dark hair longer than he'd expected to find it. There are unfamiliar mannerisms, too. Say, what? She says. This, for instance. He waits for her to turn. The coming weeks seem a desert they must cross together. A desert like the one noble Heracles faced in the 10th of his 12 labors, firing impotent arrows at the sun as he went. This morning, waiting for their delayed flight in the congested and airless Gatwick lounge, he expected her to say that she didn't want to go. They shouldn't be going. Something was wrong. Instead, she was almost giddy. She stood, checked the screen, sat down, stood again. Finally, he cleared his throat and announced that the whole trip was his treat. As in, I've got it covered. It's all on me. He watched her fail to suppress a smile and wished, though committed to it, she would resist the gesture even just a little. You deserve it, he went on, imitating another man, wealthier, more assured. Relax, enjoy yourself, work on that tan. No, she says now, she isn't hungry. Maybe they should just go to sleep. Despite the heat, she will not undress, blaming the multitudinous bugs. In bed together, for the first time in weeks, they lie parallel, sweating into the narrow, creaking mattress. As she sleeps, he opens his guidebook, reads again about the Parthenon. The facts are agreeably familiar: 9:4 ratio, illusory curves, imperceptible slant of columns, singular harmony of design. The temple, subject of several classroom projects, has fascinated him since he first encountered it in a child's encyclopedia, age 7. As a boy, he was shy, inclined to play alone, his sister much older and indifferent to his japes. He concocted and enacted perilous missions, defeating imaginary enemies, leading invented armies, aligning with the classical heroes and their plights. Theseus versus Minotaur, Odysseus versus Cyclops. Later, he learned that these fixations could pass as scholarly interests. At 15, thanks to an appendectomy the night before departure, he missed the school trip to Greece. He was crushed, certain he had lost his only chance, and 3 years later found himself the only ancient history fresher at Leeds never to have made the fabled climb from the Athens streets up to the Acropolis. He dozes off, book on chest, and dreams of reaching the Buell Gate, arriving at last in glorious sunlight, struck dumb by the splendor, comfortable in sandals. When his alarm rings in the morning, she's already in the shower. They walk around the Placa, jostling with tourists in tennis shoes and many-pocketed shorts. From their table outside, a busy cafe, they can see the Acropolis up above the rooftops, stately and unreal. Are we going up today? She says. He shakes his head, sees his reflection in her glasses. Save it for the end. Sipping her coffee, she nods. In which case, I might order some food. They met, watching a band called Fear the Greeks, in a room above the pub, both in their second year. Afterwards, Tom found himself sitting with Becca, whose best friend Lindsay was sleeping with the singer at the far end of a crowded table. Their isolation from the group made him nervous, their separate togetherness, but she seemed unfazed and talked easily to him. She was pretty, but not destructively so. He could tell she'd been an awkward teen. What did you think? He asked. Seems like the real fear is melody, she said. He wanted to kiss her immediately, though it took a couple weeks. After that, he forgot all about his year-long crush on Lindsay. Becca was his first proper girlfriend, while he was apparently her 4th relationship. The ex he disliked to hear about most was Christian, her first. There were photographs all over one wall of her room, nights out in fancy dress with girlfriends from home, portraits of her family and late pet rabbit, and Christian featured often. Tom, afraid to seem jealous, never asked if the other two were lurking somewhere in that sea of faces. Her taste and smell seemed to him unsurpassable. On any given evening, he could bury his face in her armpit and feel utterly content. One morning, in bed watching her dress, weak, wintry sunlight leaking through her curtains. He caught her humming Three Blind Mice while pulling on her tights, and the whole scene rendered him speechless with affection. He'd never been happier. But as the months went by, he sensed her growing into herself in a way he couldn't match. With Becca at his side, he felt fully formed, or as close as he would get. But she began to think and speak more grandly, imagining futures in which his role seemed far from pivotal. Out with friends, he would hear her saying she might head to Sydney for a year of work, or she might do a law conversion, ideas she never shared with him. When he brought them up later, getting into bed, she pretended not to hear. Soon, graduation loomed. They'd been a couple for 18 months, had never lived together. He made tentative suggestions: travel, work abroad, move to London. He declared his love too often, insisting that he saw them together, that his plans included her. She changed the subject, responded vaguely. The long perspective seemed unwelcome. In the end, the only decision they made was to retreat to their respective family homes and save 3 late summer weeks in Greece. When they left Leeds, Tom went back to Guernsey and found a job on the Digimap project with a GPS, a camera, and Barnaby, a flatulent ginger-haired teenager who had never been further than Alderney. He drove around pinpointing and photographing the island's 52 navy blue postboxes. Becca, meanwhile, sunbathed in the garden of her parents' Berkshire settlement. He called her every day, rambling, desperate to prove himself essential. The summer passed too slowly, and not slowly enough. A week before the flight to Athens, Lindsay called him. They hadn't spoken since graduation. She'd always been Becca's friend, not his. He noted a flutter in his gut. "We need to talk," she said. "I just got off the phone with Bex." Afterwards, he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his knees. Waves of nausea came at him. The floor was falling away. In the following days, he waited for Becca to tearfully cancel the trip. The call never came. From Athens, they travel out into the country. The buses are stifling with shoddy suspension, and the search for a place to stay becomes arduous with each passing night. They eat too many souvlakia, addictive at first, but by the 10th unpalatable. At dinner, white paper tablecloths held in place by metal clips, they sit across from one another, gazing blankly at people passing by or out at the placid sea. His blue aluminum water flask, bought for the trip at some expense, begins to smell drain-like. Becca refuses to drink from it, buying Evian daily with his money. He watches her gulping the cool, fresh water, but can't give up on the flask. Among the ruins at Olympia, she lies out on one of the seating ridges, writing postcards while he wanders alone. Later, they track down a post box on the main street of the modern town adjacent to the site. "This would blow Barnaby's mind," he says, taking a photograph. She drops her cards in and ambles away. "Who's Barnaby?" Arriving late in Argostoli, they found every hotel and hostel full. Close to midnight, they trudge up and down the lamplit harbor, selecting a bench. On the pavement beside it, he curls up, offering a sort of apologetic lullaby as she wraps herself sullenly in a purple sarong. He wakes in the night to find a small white dog sniffing at his flask. It pisses on their bags and scampers away. As the sun rises over the hills, he scrapes himself up and joins her on the bench. Together they have faced adversity. The feeling makes him doubt what he is doing, what he plans to do. The doubt passes. As promised, he pays for everything. Her devotion to the sun is total. On the beach, she rotates like the hour hand on a clock, pointing her feet at the source. One day, at a remote Ithaca bay, he swims his way out and removes his blue checked shorts, floating naked for a while. This becomes habitual. Soon he is letting the shorts sink, eventually climbing down, open-eyed through the warm, clear water to retrieve them. He maintains a mental list of locations where he plays this little game, which remains a secret until the day comes when he can't locate the shorts. After almost 20 minutes of searching, he paddles reluctantly shoreward, lingering in the shallows like a child relieving itself, surrounded by bathers in appropriate attire, waving to Becca, who is flat on her back, headphones in. At last she sits up and comes down to the water. It takes her a moment to grasped the situation. She fetches him a towel, as asked, but makes him emerge before he can have it, her laughter ensuring that everyone sees. In the third week, at Myrtos on the southcoast of Crete, they argue about the sunscreen he has purchased. The factor's too high, she says. She walks to the water and swims out. After a while, he follows and finds her floating naked, swimsuit bundled in fist. He takes her in his arms. She kisses him ravenously. He's quickly inside her, her legs clamped around him as his own kick madly to keep them afloat. It is all very fierce at first, but soon becomes absurd. They disentangle and drift apart, quiet as they clamber back into their suits, legs still flailing underwater. That evening they make basic cheese sandwiches and take them to the beach. The sun goes down in a frenzy of color, and as night settles, they sip their beers and listen to feeble waves. In an instant, every light in the village goes out. An ecstatic child somewhere begins to whoop. She gasps and reaches for his hand. "Power cut," he whispers. They gather their things and pick their way across the rocks, to walk slowly through the unlit streets. Everything is still. People gather over candles, murmuring, the small flames shining on their eyes and teeth. Some sing churchy songs. Tom and Becca sit on a low limestone wall, and some kittens soon appear, shy but curious. One climbs up into her lap. "Keen," she says. "Keen," he says. She leans forward to whisper into the cat's pink ear. "Lindsay, is that you?" They stay like that for what seems a long time. The power, when it finally comes back on, is met with hearty cheers and applause. Delirious children go careening through the streets. When they return to their room and switch on the lights, something important has ended. Becca shields her eyes. Too bright. With 2 nights to go, they take a ferry to Athens via the Cyclades, with a stop overnight at Naxos. He has just enough cash for the tickets, finally at his overdraft limit. The ferry is packed. Opposite them sits a Greek couple and their sulky preteen son. The man, overweight with a thick black mustache, stares at the space between Becca's legs. His wife reads a romance novel, blowing her hair from her eyes. When the boat stops at Santorini, they stand and walk away, taking their bags, the son 20 paces behind. Some time passes before Tom notices the wallet on the man's vacated seat. He surveys the crowded cabin. Becca gazes out of the window, listening to music. As naturally as he can, he makes his way to a toilet stall, wallet in pocket. He holds numerous cards, a crumpled wad of banknotes, a battered passport. At the photo page, he finds the grim smile of a constipated drinker, Niklos Yannis Valoridis. He counts 180 euros. He brings the notes to his nose and inhales, something he has never done. For half an hour, he searches every corner of the ferry. The family's seats remain empty. He stands at the railing, looking at the water and the island swimming past, the sky turning pink. When someone points out at Naxos, he returns to the toilets, emerging from a stall to wash his hands, avoiding his reflection in the mirror. At the information desk, he explains. The young attendant, crisp white shirt, hair gelled impeccably, turns to the passport's photo page. Tom makes a show of studying the image, speculates that the man and his family disembarked at Santorini. The attendant counts the money in the wallet. 35 euros. Say, what? Becca says when he returns to his seat and tells her they are nearly there, "You look funny." "I'm starving." A message is broadcast through tinny ceiling speakers. 2 words stand out. Niklos Valoridis. Tom's chest tightens as he scans the cabin. The message is repeated. He expects to see a finger pointed his way, a unit of crisp-shirted, gel-haired young men advancing. He lurches to his feet, grabs his pack. "Did they say it's time?" Becca says, stretching languidly. "Didn't I just tell you we were nearly there?" She recoils. Okay, Jesus. From the deck, he sees the harbor lights glowing up ahead. The sky is darkening. He marches to the top of the gated staircase, keeping his face obscured. The ferry slows, the docks seeming to come no closer as the minutes drag by. His right hand clasps the folded notes in his pocket. The urge to toss them overboard is strong, but apart from the risk of them blowing back, there is the plan and his desire to see it fulfilled. Finally, the gate lifts. They make their way down onto the quay, his pack on one shoulder, hers on the other, striding away from the gathered hawkers, calling and waving to him. Not until they reach the heart of the town does he slow enough to let her catch up. At a taverna, he asks for a bottle of white wine. He tells Becca to order whatever she likes, no matter the cost. Second to last night treat, he says. They share a spread of meze, followed by a grilled snapper for him, moussaka for her, the best food they've eaten on trip. The bottle is drained, replaced by another. They talk more freely than on any other night. About Greece, about Leeds, how the last 3 years have vanished. She sighs and leans back in her chair. What are we going to do, Thomas? She hasn't called him that in months. He refills their glasses. Remember that band the night we met? She frowns, one finger held up. Fear something. Don't tell me. She's beginning to slur. When he tells her, she reaches across to squeeze his hand, knocking over an empty glass. It's from Virgil, he says. Aeneas says, I fear the Greeks, even bearing gifts. You know the story of the Trojan horse? She raises an eyebrow. Give me some credit. I never understood what Lindsay saw in that guy. He drinks more wine. Tables on either side of them have filled up with diners, locals mostly, a few tourists. Ivy coils around the beams, and in the corner a fountain trickles. This was so sweet of you, she says, pushing her clean plate away. The whole trip has been so... She swallows, looks away. You're always so sweet. He seems he must do it now or not at all. I have to tell you something, he says. About Lindsay, actually. Something happened. He hears his voice as if it belongs to someone else. Just before we left Leeds. She sways back. What kind of something? You gone. There was hardly anyone left. A few of us went out, and it all got a bit, messy. He watches as it sinks in. Her head shakes slowly from side to side. She screws her eyes shut, wrinkles her nose. Did you have sex with her? Is that what you're saying? I'm sorry, I just thought... But she left the day after me! His hands are clasped under the table. Right, so that night. Straight after I left. She's almost shouting now. Straight the fucking minute I left. People are turning to look. She covers her face with her hands. I can't believe her. She's always saying how you liked her first. It's so funny. She sobs. He checks himself for satisfaction and finds none. Finally, she lowers her hands and sniffs. Why are you telling me this? I didn't want to lie. The waitress comes to clear their plates and glares at him, patting Becca gently on the shoulder. He can think of nothing to do but drink his wine and wait. I can't do this, she says, her voice high-pitched and shaky. She straightens up, lifts her chin. I did it too. I slept with someone else. He feels a kick in his chest. Who? When? Christian. How many times? His lack of surprise seems to stop her for a moment. Just once. It was at home, like 3 weeks before we came out here. Just once? She looks down at her hands. A few times. Do you want to be with him? She shrugs. Do you want to be with Lindsay? That was just my best friend. He fights to steady his voice. It's not the same as screwing your childhood sweetheart all summer long. Plates of honey-soaked pastries are brought out. The waitress glances between the two of them as if less sure now where her sympathies lie. She takes the second empty bottle, not offering another. They sit considering the glazed treats. I can't eat anymore, he says at last. She dabs at her reddened eyes with a napkin, collecting mascara smears. Oh, Thomas, she says, what are we going to do? When he was 15, after the appendectomy, he stayed in the hospital for almost a week. He was back at school, though, when the Greek trip returned. The boys were all sunburned and brimming with stories, all of which featured the German girls, a party of 16-year-olds they'd run into wherever they went. There had been midnight liaisons, illicit beers, lost virginities, and other milestones. The trippers acquired immediate stature, swaggering down the corridors like conquering heroes. Tom could only watch and listen, lingering at the circle's edge as tales were recounted, glories relived. Nobody mentioned the thing he longed to hear about most. He wanted to ask, what was it like? But he knew they would only laugh. It was just some old temple, after all. At dawn, they dragged themselves back to the harbor. He tells her he has run out of money, and she stops without a word at an ATM. Her silence lasts well into the crossing. "It's funny," she says eventually, looking out on the water from their shaded deck seats. "I told Lindsay about Christian, and she really tore into me. She made me feel terrible. The whole time." At 11, they dock at Piraeus. Athens feels familiar, or at least less alien when they arrive. Backed in the Plaka, they find a cheap hotel. As she pays, she asks for separate beds, but their light-filled top-floor room has just one. They lie apart, turned away, midday city noise straying in through the open windows. When he is certain she has fallen asleep, he slips out onto the balcony. The skyline of the old town lies out around him. Flat roofs and cables, labyrinthine alleys. Above it all towers the Acropolis, treasures obscured by its steep limestone flanks, sky beyond cloudless and decadently blue. In the bathroom, he splashes his face with cold water, tidies his hair, brushes his teeth. He stands for a moment, watching Becca sleep, her mouth ajar, right knee bent, still in last night's pale green dress. He wants to kneel beside the bed, lower his head, and breathe her in one last time, but can't risk waking her up. From her purse, he takes the necessary currency. On crowded, cobbled streets, blue fat flask in hand, he is absorbed by the westward flow along the north edge of the rock. He imagines Becca, back at home, next week, or maybe sooner, confronting Lindsay with his whole story, realizing he lied. He wonders if those weary Greek soldiers, standing in the wreckage, found victory no less hollow than the gift they built to seal it. The sun beats down as he climbs towards the Buell gate, people around him making their way in the grueling heat. Sweat stings his eyes as he bows his head. He can feel it taking shape ahead of him. Weathered marble, crumbling pillars, and tries to widen his stride. He tries to feel the moment's weight, to push Becca out of his mind. But though he knows she is sleeping on the hotel bed, limbs bare on the white sheets, she is up there too among the statues and columns, the catalog rubble, waiting for him.